Welcome to the LongTerm Care Chronicles podcast.
In this episode, we're going to be speaking with the leader of the Green Party of Ontario, Mike Schreiner. He'll be discussing the long-term care in Ontario. Due to some technical difficulties, you'll only hear part of the audio for Mike Schreiner in the first 5 minutes, and afterwards it clears up. Thank you. So let's have a listen.
Yeah, my pleasure to join you today on such an important issue.
Thank you. So yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And we'll get started. So the first question will be, your green vision for Ontario focuses on 3 pillars: jobs, people, and planet. Can you describe, looking at the current situation for those living in long-term care, how they can benefit from these 3 pillars?
Yeah, so one of the things we're really pushing right now is a green and caring recovery to the COVID pandemic. And that means investing in the caring professions as we focus on caring for people. And, for far too long, long-term care in particular has been ignored in Ontario. And unfortunately, we've seen the tragic consequences of that this year. To lose almost 2,500 of our loved ones to COVID-19 is heartbreaking. And it really highlights the need to invest in higher standards of care, additional staff for elders in long-term care. But it's broader than that. I think we need to reimagine how we care for elders, period. We need more investment in home care, and we need to be looking at new care arrangements. So if I look at other countries around the world and look at things like co-housing for elders, where you can have your own independent living space, but have some shared community spaces to address issues around isolation and loneliness. To look at other forms of housing. So we're not warehousing people, because I think quality of life is so important. And so looking at new models of care arrangements, so maybe smaller facilities and homes for people, just more dignified care in whatever setting we have for elders. I think all of those aspects are really important. And so when I think about people, it's investing in people. And when I think about jobs, it's investing in jobs that care for people, and ensuring that the people who care for our loved ones are provided with a living wage, have guaranteed full-time employment with access to benefits, have things like paid sick leave. So when they're not feeling well, they don't feel compelled to come into work and possibly get other people sick. So there's a whole host of ways in which we need to invest in caring for people and the caring economy. And as somebody who's the leader of the Green Party, I would say that those are all like low carbon jobs too. So if we think about addressing the climate crisis and needing to employ people in ways that don't contribute to pollution, well, caring for people is those are jobs that don't pollute, they don't contribute to the climate crisis, and they actually contribute to making our communities stronger and more resilient. And I'll finally close by saying that I think we need to invest in more infrastructure that supports elders. I'm lucky here in Guelph, in my riding, we have a community center that's just dedicated to well-being and better health outcomes for everyone.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, those are great points that you made in regards to the situation and how to be able to kind of work to manage that. And so now with the next question is I have here is, would you be able to describe, as an outspoken advocate for local food and water, can you tell us in long-term care perspective, how you see your government making changes in the current system with regards to meals and access to water?
Yeah, well, first of all, we need to make sure our long-term care and retirement homes have more money available to purchase healthy local food. I can tell you, prior to going into politics, I was a part of starting up an organization that was working to get more healthy local food into schools and universities and long-term care facilities, hospitals, various public institutions. And it became very challenging because the food budgets are so low. And again, food is such an important part of people's health and well-being. So much socializing happens around food. I mean, think about almost all of our celebrations are centered around sharing a meal together, and just the importance of access to healthy food and clean drinking water. And if you look at some of the testimony that's been given to, the public commission that the government set up around long-term care, it's been heartbreaking hearing many of the stories, but I was particularly struck by how many residents and family caregivers talked about the inadequate quality of the food available in our long-term care homes. And so to me, we can make this a win-win. We can support local farmers, which will support our local economy and help create jobs in our local communities. And we can support residents in our long-term care homes to have healthier food, which then means their well-being and satisfaction and life quality of life will be improved, which then also improves things for the staff that care for those residents as well. And so to me, it's just a win-win-win for everyone if we can invest more in making sure people have access to healthy local food.
No, that would be great because the next question basically goes into the dollar amount. So right now, currently, there's only $3 per meal, including snacks, are spent on
Mhm.
daily processed meals for seniors living in long-term care. Prior to the pandemic, seniors were repeatedly found lacking essential hydration while living in long-term care. Does your party have a plan to change this?
Yeah, so our biggest plan is to increase the budgets for food. Just think about it in your own life. Like, how many people spend less than $10 a day on food? Just think about that for a second. Even if you eat out for one of those meals, that would be more than the entire food budget for a resident in a long-term care facility, and so it's just completely unacceptable. And so one is making sure those budgets are adequate to provide proper nutrition and hydration for residents, but also to make a commitment to sourcing more fresh, local, healthy food. So then we can support local farmers and local economies. But that local food tends to be, it's not going to be highly processed. And so it's going to have more nutrients and just be healthier for people. And that will have other benefits to people's quality of life, health outcomes. I think it'll reduce illness and just stress on residents, which will then just improve the experience for everyone, for family, for residents, for staff, etc.
And just to follow up with that, because this would almost go into what you were saying in terms of having smaller communities, because I know there are some long-term care facilities where residents can have a garden, they can plant vegetables and to be able to grow and to be able to use that. Would that as well fall into something that should be part of the discussion as well, if it's capable that they can be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I'll give you a personal
Mhm.
experience. So my grandmother, grandfather, my grandparents, when they moved into a retirement community and a retirement home, and then an adjacent long-term care home, they were able to have a garden. And my grandma, especially, I grew up in a farm community, but my grandma had always gardened, and much of the food we ate, came from our family's garden. And just even that physical activity, the mental health aspects of it, the connecting with nature, the growing of your own healthy local food, the sharing of it with other residents was just so important to building community, quality of life, mental and physical health. So absolutely, I think integrating food production, growing of food, and cooking of food as well. Far too many of our public institutions, whether it's a hospital, long-term care facilities, schools, etc., have moved to kind of this model where none of the food is prepared on site, and so then it oftentimes becomes highly processed, less nutritious food. cheaper, but you get what you pay for. And so I think integrating food production, both from a growing and a cooking of food, I think is really important. And I can't understate just the importance of building community around that and those shared tasks that people can do together, and just how important that is to mental, physical health.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree, and it does make a big difference in just their lives, just as to how they interact with each other. So definitely that would be fantastic, if that could be, part of the discussion and part of the platform moving forward. So in regards to your party's taglines with real people, real solutions, you have said your party is committed to honesty, integrity, and making decisions that put people first. So back in late May of 2020, the Canadian military issued a report on the state of long-term care homes. Now, looking forward, what does your party propose in order to make improvements in the ever-growing long-term care system?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, the reading the reports from the Canadian military did not surprise me, but it still broke my heart. I mean, I don't see how any human being can read those reports and not be heartbroken and not just in some ways actually be embarrassed
Yeah.
that we as a society collectively allowed those conditions to exist in our long-term care homes, and to think that elders who have contributed so much to our society and communities were treated that way is completely unacceptable. So what we've been calling for is an immediate investment of $1.8 billion to hire more staff for long-term care homes, to move to a minimum standard of care of 4 hours a day, excuse me, and to ensure that the staff in long-term care homes are paid a living wage and are guaranteed full-time work with benefits. We also have advocated for increasing the ratio of registered nurses in our long-term care homes, uh, because we want to make sure that there's adequate staffing levels and adequately trained staffing levels in our long-term care homes to provide the care that our elders deserve. So that to me is an immediate issue. And so
Mhm.
I was really disappointed, frankly, that over the summer when BC and Quebec were starting to hire additional staff in long-term care, Ontario did not do that. I remember my very first question when the Queen's Park came back in September was asking why we
Yes.
were not hiring more staff for long-term care. And I remember the minister at the time saying, well, we can't just snap our fingers and hire additional staff. And I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. That is why we should have spent the summer doing it. It's why we need to be working on it right now. We can't delay this, because you're right, we can't snap our fingers. And so here we are, 6, 7 months later, and the province finally yesterday put a dollar amount on long-term care staff, but they're not even going to fully implement that for another 4 or 5 years. And our elders can't wait that long. Like, they need that care now. And it's also for the staff too. I can't tell you how many staff who work in long-term care are feeling burned out, underappreciated, and really, it's a very stressful situation. And so, as care providers are stressed out and put in very difficult situations, that's going to affect the quality of care they're able to provide, no matter how dedicated you are and passionate you are, how good of a job you do. There's only so much you can ask people to do day in and day out under very stressful conditions. So to me, that's the most immediate need. And
Mhm.
then I think we need to have a longer term vision of really just overhauling and rethinking elder care in general, like I mentioned in answer to one of
Yes.
your previous questions. And I think one of the things that really needs to guide the way we approach long-term care moving forward is that we need to ensure that we prioritize care over profits. I just found it so disheartening to learn that during the pandemic, when many of our long-term care homes had outbreaks or in crisis, that some of the for-profit homes were providing, dividends, and like quite lucrative dividends to their shareholders. And I just felt that was really tone deaf, and really, just was kind of a slap in the face to those residents and their families, especially those who lost their loved ones. And related to that, I was just deeply disappointed with Bill 218 that the province brought forward to provide immunity to negligent long-term care homes. To me, I'm sorry, negligent homes don't deserve a get out of jail free card. As a matter of fact, they should be held accountable. And families who lost loved ones due to negligence in long-term care, they deserve access to justice, and they deserve to ensure that those homes are held accountable. And so, I've been very disappointed by the way in which the government, the Ontario government, Ford government, failed to adequately prepare over the summer for the second wave, and the way in which they continue to delay making the investments in the solutions that we need. And on top of that, they've added insult to injury by providing legal immunity for negligent long-term care homes.
No, absolutely right. It's just been very disappointing to see some of the decisions made by the government. And in regards to, I guess, with this whole re-imaging of long-term care, one of our listeners posed a question. They had attended a first policy response meeting, and a former PSW explained that the Canadian Army report, where residents were found, sitting in their own waste for hours on end, um, they explained as well that there was only 2 PSWs working at the time to service only 16 residents, many of whom required more than one PSW to attend to their needs during each shift, including any acute care or emergencies. There was just not enough time to care for all these residents during the shift, and therefore it was common practice that residents would, sit in their own waste for long periods of time. Would you be able to tell us as to what your party plans on taking in regards to the hours of care, the wages of long-term care staff, and how many staff will any increase be elevated to a particular standard in long-term care?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I've supported for a long time a minimum standard of care, 4 hours a day, and that's for all residents. I think there's been a little question. It's like, is that for every resident, or is that average? And so I think a minimum standard for every resident. Hiring enough staff to be able to manage that properly in a sustainable way. And again, making sure that we have proper ratios when it comes to trained staff. The government's indicated that they're sort of moving forward with this resident care provider that has even a lower level of training than PSWs. So I would like to see trained PSWs and trained registered nurses in proper ratios, so we have trained, qualified staff. All staff need to be paid a living wage. So I would like to see not only see the pandemic pay made permanent, but to see, an average of around $5 an hour pay increases, especially for PSWs. But that means that you need to have across the board pay increases. So that means registered nurses in long-term care homes. It means food staff, cleaning staff, etc. So I know there's been a lot of focus on PSWs, as there should be. I mean, I would argue that PSWs do some of the most important work. It's some of the hardest work. It requires a deep level of empathy and care, and it's grossly underpaid. But we need to be looking at all staff as well, because it takes everyone to make sure there's high quality of care and good outcomes and good quality of life experiences for residents, and then to guarantee full-time work with benefits. I mean, I think one of the things that I find problematic about our society in general is that oftentimes the caring professions, so whether it's people providing elder care or child care
Yeah.
in particular, but other forms of caring professions, but those two segments in particular tend to be grossly underpaid and undervalued in our society. And, I think, what's more important than caring for our loved ones, whether, it's our parents and grandparents or it's our children and nieces and nephews. And so investing more in the caring professions is so critically important in making sure people are adequately compensated for the good work that they do.
Oh, for sure. And then the fact that you mentioned in terms of looking at everybody, all the participants that do work within long-term care. So that is your dietary staff, your physiotherapist, the occupational therapist, everyone that does come in to be able to make sure that everyone is taken care of and being looked at and a part of that whole management of care as well. And then I
Yeah,
guess,
on that note, if you don't mind me,
mhm,
uh, I've met with a number of long-term care, executive directors, general managers, sort of senior administrators, and all of them have said that they really welcome the pandemic pay,
yes.
but because it's only focused on, one
Yeah.
group of staff, that is creating some complications and in some cases resentment among other staff that don't qualify for that pandemic pay. And so I think the government needs to recognize the importance, just even for staff morale, teamwork, the sense of everyone being together to ensure that everyone is adequately compensated.
Yeah, so no one is left out. So everyone's all on the same page, and that's what's definitely needed at this point in time because all of their roles and responsibilities are just as important. Yes, as you said before, the PSWs are the ones that are more talked about, and rightfully so. But however, this other supporting people that are part of the whole concept of for long-term care for supporting that particular resident needs to be looked at as well because we can't leave anybody out or leave anyone behind as well. So, the what I would say though, in regards to, I guess, for, in the next question is that, currently in long-term care, the majority of the workforce are women, and it's women caring for other women, again, being paid by, minimum wage. And, how would you like, I know you've mentioned that, yes, there should be standards of care, but how can we ensure that they don't get overworked moving forward, in long-term care?
Yeah, that's exactly why we need to hire additional staff. And we need to make sure that all of our long term care facilities are adequately staffed. Um, some of the reports of, two PSWs caring for 16 residents is just completely unsustainable. And I would challenge any politician. I've taken some of the challenges of, can you get yourself all ready in 5 minutes?
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
you know, toilet, shower, shave, clean yourself up, be dressed. Can you do that in 5 minutes? So to expect, a PSW to provide that kind of care in such a short amount of time is just completely unsustainable and unrealistic. And it's so hard because I've met with so many PSWs in particular who care deeply about the people that they serve. And it breaks their heart to know that they're doing everything they can and are completely run off their feet and are paying for that in their own physical and mental health,
Yes.
trying to do the best they can to care for residents in impossible situations because there simply is not enough staff. And so that's why we have to make sure that when we look at minimum standards of care, 4 hours,
Mhm.
that it's equated with staff ratios that make that possible and sustainable for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely, because that needs to be part of the discussion, and it definitely needs to be examined a little bit more closely, to be as you said, the 4 hours, whether that staffing ratio is 5 to 1, 6 to 1, but it definitely needs to be defined as to what that's going to look like moving forward. So I know when it comes to to people, you stated that your party will improve health by preventing illness, not treating it, um, providing more support for mental health, primary and community care. We must make Ontario fair for everyone by fighting against systemic racism and sexism. And let's make our democracy work for all citizens, not just for well-connected insiders. More than ever, residents and staff of long-term care have needed change in a way that are currently living, how much they are working, all while putting themselves at risk and facing age and sex discrimination. Would you be able to tell us how your party will support those living and those working in long-term care on those lines for your party's platform?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, let's have an honest discussion. And I think one of the reasons that PSWs and other staff in long-term care homes tend to be grossly underpaid and undervalued is because they're predominantly women, not exclusively, but predominantly women, and oftentimes are Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so I think systemic racism plays a role in why the caring professions are so underfunded. And so if we're going to provide adequate standards of care for long-term care residents, we have to recognize the role that sexism and racism plays in the way in which those homes are staffed. And so calling it out is the first step, and then making the investments to address staffing levels, compensation, full-time pay, benefits is the next step. And so that's why it's so important. And so to me, I think it's a conversation we need to have on the level of values. What kind of society do we want Ontario to be? How do we see ourselves? Like, who are we as Ontarians? Are we the kind of people who are going to be compassionate and care for people and make sure people live in dignity or not? And so, if we want to be a compassionate, caring, inclusive society, if we want to build strong, resilient, caring communities, we have to make investments in that. And I know, money isn't the only answer. I mean, there's a lot of other answers, but the bottom line is a budget says a lot about the values of our province and our communities. And if we have underinvested in long-term care for decades. And unfortunately, we saw the tragic consequences of that during COVID. And I think we owe it to our elders, and we owe it to the people who care for our elders to say that that's not the kind of Ontario we want to live in. That's not the values that represent this province. And we are going to make the financial commitment to make sure we address this issue, and we do it in a compassionate, dignified way. And so it really, I think in some ways it starts by, looking ourselves in the mirror and asking ourselves, what kind of province we want to be and what kind of people we want to be. And I think we're better than what we've seen in long-term care over the last few decades, and certainly what we've seen in the past year. A lot of people have said COVID has hit long-term care residents and elders in every country around the world, and that is true. But if you look at the numbers, it's been worse in Ontario and Canada than any other G7, G20 country. And so we particularly have a problem here that we need to address.
Yeah, we definitely need to look it over and see what exactly that, we really need to invest our time, our money, and how this should be looking moving forward. Now, in regards to yesterday's announcement by the government, do you think that does go anywhere near goes into any depth into what needs to happen right now, as opposed to waiting another at least 4 years. I think the announcement was before they were start to invest into long-term care.
Yeah, so to me, yesterday's announcement was completely inadequate. Uh, we need investments in long-term care right now. We needed investments in long-term care 15, 20, 30 years
Yes.
ago.
Yeah.
And so to wait another 4 years after the tragedy that we've experienced this year, I mean, we've almost lost 2,500 of our elders to COVID in 2020. We've lost 8 staff members to COVID in long-term care homes. I mean, that's just, it's unacceptable to say that we're going to wait another 4 years to make the investments needed to increase staffing levels and to ensure higher standards of care. And so I would like to see those investments immediately. And it's important in so many ways. And it gets back to my earlier point where I said, the minister responded and said, well, you can't snap your fingers and just hire more staff, which is true, which is why we should have started last summer.
Yes.
when the wave 1 of the virus exposed how vulnerable our elders are in long-term care, because it is going to take time.
Yeah.
And so to come out with an announcement to say we're going to invest $1.9 billion and in 4 years, we're going to have enough staff. Well, it's like, no, we can't wait now. We need to be spending that $1.9 billion right now. We need to guarantee a permanent pay increase to long-term care staff so we can begin to recruit more people. So more people will have an incentive to go into the training programs.
Yes.
To eventually be staff in long-term care. My fear is that if we don't do it now, not only are we not providing the dignified care that our elders need, but we may not even achieve it in 4 years, because I've talked to so many staff who are burned out, who are just at the end of their rope, and understandably so, who have been working in very challenging working conditions prior to COVID. And then they've been almost unbearable working conditions during COVID. And, without those folks' just passion and dedication and commitment to the people they care for, the whole system would have, I think, collapsed. And so we've asked so much of those staff, and I'm worried that we're going to lose staff without the proper investments now, let alone the investments that are needed to hire additional staff. And so we simply can't wait 4 years.
I definitely would agree, because with what staff are facing now currently within the with this pandemic, many are leaving the profession and they're not coming back. So I don't know where staff are going to then be able to come from to in 4 years' time. And not only that, for students that would choose this as a profession, because enrollment in some of these classes are down as well in terms of people choosing that, because the outlook or the outcome is not very beneficial for them, as you said, as an incentive to be part of that work environment. Now, going into, I guess, with inspection reports within long-term care, how do you think that should be changed and done moving forward for long-term care?
Yeah, well, we just simply need to have on-site inspections. I mean, to know that, there are only 9 inspections of long-term care homes in 2019, it's just unacceptable. And no matter how much the government can try to spin their way out of that, I think it's had a contribution to what we saw or what we've seen in 2020. And so, I think we need to go back to an inspection regime where there is on-site inspection for every long-term care home every year, and to make sure that the rules are enforced.
That's good. No, that's great. Yeah, and in terms of how they would be enforced, what do you mean by that in terms of would just not a written notice? Is there going to be monetary penalties with that as well?
Yeah, I think, oftentimes, you would want monetary penalties to be last resort, of course,
Hmm.
but certainly, having the stick, so to speak,
Yeah.
at your disposal is absolutely essential. So if you're going to have facilities that are non-compliant and don't take action to be compliant, then sometimes, unfortunately, monetary penalties is the only way to get some facilities to comply. And so the government should have that in the toolkit for sure.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then just lastly here, so you grew up on a farm and you have been a strong advocate for local food. If you were living in long-term care, how would you like to have your eggs served? Because that seems to be a question that comes up quite often.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to have real eggs and not some sort of powdered egg or anything like that. And then my personal preference is an omelet. I have an omelet every day, but I think
Mhm.
people should be given the options. Some people like scrambled eggs, some people like omelets, some people like fried eggs, some people like poached eggs. I
Absolutely.
think residents should have the opportunity to make, to have some choice because that's part of uh, dignity and in your life.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on to the Long-Term Care Chronicles again and sharing and taking your time. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. And this is such an important issue, and it's so tragic that it's taken COVID to
Yes.
expose what so many people already knew was the inadequate resources in our long-term care homes. And I just want to say we owe it to our elders and we owe it to the people who care for them to make sure that we never allow something like this to happen again.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Thank you again.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please leave a comment as we would love to hear your feedback. Please follow us on Twitter at Family Councils and Facebook at Family Councils Collaborative Alliance. Again, thank you.